Today's episode, we are diving into setting high goals, the good, the bad, the ugly of what it takes to really set crazy high goals and go for them.
Yeah, I'm really excited to do this episode because we've had a lot of breakthroughs. I've had a lot of breakthroughs recently on setting high goals, and there's been triggers, there's been eyes opened and all of that, and I'm like, we have to share this because this is so huge. I see this in myself and in like our sales team, and I think it's just something that everyone can relate to, and it is in what you come up against when you set high goals and why you might not set high goals. And so the first thing I want to talk about is how just that high goals is so subjective. And I think part of why Margy and I are this perfect partnership is that when I feel like a goal is high, she's like, it's not that high. We should have done that a year ago.
People are like, wow, not going to tell Margie anything. She's going to crush my spirit. No, but yes. So that is the first thing that's really interesting about high goals is how incredibly subjective they are. And it's not, so it's you compared to other people, right? Because if you compare yourself to someone who's way further ahead of you in their business, what's a high goal for you? They're like, oh, that's cute. And like, they're nice about it, but they're like, oh, like I remember the first time, I remember like our first 100K month and we were hanging out with all these 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs who were like, oh, that's big. I remember my first 100K month. And they weren't being condescending. They're wonderful. And they were genuinely excited for us, right? Because you remember that milestone, like the same way with someone hitting 7 figures for the first time, we would be so excited because it's like, oh, I remember that. But so to these other entrepreneurs, it's subjective because our goals are much lower than their goals. But then there's also to yourself, right? If you compare your goals now to your goals 2 years ago, it's crazy what felt so big compared to how that feels right now. Sometimes you don't even remember. I think it's so funny when you look back on like purchases you made and you don't remember the amount, you just remember that it felt really expensive. And if you look up what the amount was, it's kind of shocking because you're like, wow, I remember the feeling like that was this huge splurge. And then as you grow and you make more money and you look back at that, you're like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I remember that the first time that I really came up against like setting high goals is when we were at the advanced course, one of Landmark's programs. And I remember there was like this moment of like walking back from the hotel to the seminar and just having this like light bulb moment of like this income goal that I had set and realized like Margy, you had set like one income goal for us. And I was like, yeah, like, and I kind of set another one that was lower. And then there was just like this moment, and I don't know like exactly what happened or how it worked, but I just was like, oh my gosh, I could just see, I kind of saw the light and my possibilities were, do you remember that, Margy? I mean, I'm sure you remember the advanced course, but do you remember kind of the moment of like having seeing me kind of like increase my goal of what I thought was possible?
I mean, I don't remember a specific moment, but I mean, the thing about advanced course that is so powerful is that I
Yeah.
think that like everybody has that experience of like they just what
Yeah.
they see as possible changes. And I think
Mhm.
it's like, so when you were talking about how you have a lower goal and I have a higher goal, and I was thinking usually we end up hitting right between our goals.
Yeah.
But I think that's really worth acknowledging because, and that's why we've been doing so much work, and some of which has been kind of triggering together on getting on the same page with goals. Because, and it's the same as your team. Like if you and your partner are going for different goals, you're not going to hit the really high goal until you're both actually going for it. And it takes something, just going for a goal like that, whether you hit it or not, is a big personal development accomplishment. But then your team too, right? We're growing this really high performance team. We're scaling a business to $10 million really, really fast. And that requires every new person we bring on, especially in the sales department, but everywhere, to really be willing to go for big goals all the time, to constantly be willing to go for things they've never even come close to in the past. And we've talked about this on the show before, how your team is a mirror to you. So doing this work and really looking at what gets triggered when you set high goals and dealing with that is what you need to have a team that is willing to go for high goals too.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk a little bit about the triggers and like what you come up against. So I'll just share, a quick story. So we recently came out of a launch, and launches can be very tiring. It's this lot of work in a condensed amount of time because that's where you produce a lot of your sales. And long story short is like the day after the launch, we're kind of doing spillover sales, and Margy asked me like, okay, what results are you causing today? How many sales are you closing? And I said 3. And she was like, how about 6? And that moment was so triggering for me because she just said, like, okay, go for more than that. Like, you can do more than that. And of course, the trigger and what I heard was, you didn't do good enough. And that is, I see that all the time, right? In my team, like in my sales team, right? When I'm like, okay, you did this, like you need to do more. And they get all triggered, like, you don't think I'm doing good enough. And then I see it right there in myself, right? That trigger of, and I was like, but that's not what she said, but that's what I heard. So Margy, can you share from your perspective that trigger and that moment?
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing that I've been working on, like in my own personal development journey with our mentors and stuff. And this is this like drive to really go big and hold people accountable, but then this fear of triggering people because it's a lot, right? Like when you hold somebody accountable in a loving way, I'm not talking about like yelling at people,
She had
but
lots of emojis in her message. So there was
yeah, soften that up with some hearts, people. But like I realized that, growing to 10 million fast is really cool because it takes such different things to get to that point than it took for us to get to, we did like $2.5 million in 2020. So what it took to get to 2.5 and what it takes to get to 10 are so different. And it's such an energetic game. And one thing that I saw reflected in us missing our goals was my unwillingness to really like be direct with people, be direct with Jess, be direct with the team, and hold them accountable when they didn't want to be held accountable because it triggers people. And it's not, I mean, I am pretty empathetic. So on the one hand, I don't like triggering people because it's like when they get upset, I feel upset. And then there's this selfish aspect of it not wanting to deal with triggered people because it's like, I'm just trying to have a nice day, like, but it's been such a cool breakthrough. And it helps obviously that Jess has done a lot of personal development and we have a lot of trust. And so I can feel safe, saying stuff, even if it's going to trigger her, because I know she's committed to personal growth too. So she's not just going to like shut down or like run for the hills. So that's very helpful. But yeah, it's been interesting to hold people accountable because that really is going for really big goals and creating these visions that are so beyond what people maybe thought was possible for them or would have even gone for themselves is something I'm passionate about and I love doing. And I realized that we couldn't get to 10 million if any of us were holding back on our gifts and who we really are. And I was holding back on my aggressive vision casting for these high goals because it seemed like a lot to ask. And it seemed like it would upset people or they would feel like I was saying they weren't doing a good enough job. So that was something that I had to get past of like owning other people's triggers and not doing that anymore. And that's been very transformational.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's so funny. It's like full circle because that was the thing that I wanted in a partner. That's what I like. That's why I wanted you to be co-owners because I wanted that accountability because I wanted that accountability. I wanted somebody to be accountable to other than myself, because if you don't have somebody that you're accountable to, you can kind of like not meet your goals and like, who's going to know? Like it's your own business. Like you could just, and I was like, no, that's not what like I want, I want to go for big goals and have the support and accountability to get there. And then, the other thing that I've noticed is I'm like, it's so crazy how at the exact same time you can want completely two different things, right? At the same time, I want Margy to just be like, girl, you did such a good job. Like, I know we didn't meet our goal, but like, you are doing so well. And I'm so proud of you, right? Like, I want that. And at the exact same time, I also want her to give me her gift of being like, do more, like that, that goal of 3 sales is not an Olympic athlete goal, and you are an Olympic athlete in this business. Like, I want the exact same thing at 2 different times, or I want 2 different things at the exact same time. And that's just the craziness of this like entrepreneurial journey of like pushing yourself to do more, is seeing that, the safe one, wanting her to just kind of tell me I'm doing a good job, is sort of, it's the ego wants me to be safe, and seeing that for what it is kind of how I was able to grow through that trigger and that breakthrough. I have more to say, but I had to wrap up that thought because I was getting a little rambly.
No, I think it's good. I'll come back in.
Okay.
I think something really interesting, and we've been looking, like we work with great mentors, including 2 clients, Chris Kenny and Stacy Baron-Foss, who are both like incredible. And it's been really interesting in our work with both of them to see like when we're being our most powerful selves, and as Landmark would say, we're being our possibility, right? Like we're our highest self, versus reverting back to that small self, that those like child triggers, right? That we all have. I mean, it's kind of like played out to talk about them, but the reason they come up so much is because they're so real. And there's many, whether you're like woo-woo personal development or a business coach or a psychologist, everybody's talking about this past stuff with your childhood and those childhood wounds that get triggered. So it was really interesting. And the reason I love giant goals is because this stuff didn't come out when I set the goal to go to 1 million. Like it didn't require as much transformation as it takes to get to 10 million, which is the point of these goals, right? It's not just to have a $10 million business to brag about it, which we will, and it'll feel great. But it's more than that, right? It's who you have to become at that level and what you have to face. And as Stacy would say, let come up for clearing to get to that next point. And there was this really interesting, like, I know that Jess wants to be related to as an Olympic athlete. Like she's capable of that. And I found myself when we were going for 7 figures and even multi-7, I had no problem being like, this is a goal, go get it. As these goals got bigger, as they started being bigger than what we could do, so they started requiring new teams, new people in the mix. Once they got that big, there was a part of me that was like, am I being too hard? Like, that was holding back too. So at every new level, you have these new opportunities to stand. But I think I'm really glad we're talking about triggers, because someone holding you accountable and not coming to emotionally rescue you. And again, I'm not talking about being mean, but I'm talking about when someone who you're coaching or you're partnered with or, anything is in one of those moments where they're not in their power. What they want is for you to come down and reassure them, right? Because that inner child feels sometimes like being rescued is love, right? We know that's not what love is, but it feels like love for so many of us who make that connection, from the time that we're children, and standing in that accountability and being kind and being compassionate, but also being like, nope, you can do this. Like, I'm not going to give you a pat on the back and tell you like, all right, give up now. You did a good job. But being like, cool, how are you going to hit your goal? It feels like the withholding of love and connection. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really important thing to see. And that's not unique to one person. So many of us feel that way when someone sets a boundary or someone holds us accountable to really be who they know that we can be. It can feel like they're being mean or like they're withholding love and connection. And when the inner child feels like someone's withholding love and connection, that's when triggers happen, right? That's when they come up and then they try things, right? We all have this inner child, tantrums, shutting down. It's probably not a full-blown tantrum if you're a functioning adult, but you know what I mean. It's like
Yeah.
you feel that child start to kick up drama, and whether that was shutting down so that someone comes to you and asks you what's wrong, whether that's sickness because that's when you get love and care as a kid, whether that's getting really triggered and really upset and showing your upsetness so that someone will comfort you. Whatever those sirens are that your inner child sets off when it needs love and connection, that's what can come up when you go for these things.
Yeah, it's so crazy because that's exactly what happened. Like, one of the things that I love about podcasting is like sharing these stories. And that is quite literally what happened for me. I was massively triggered. I felt like she was withholding love and connection. I was exhausted from the launch and I laid down, I ignored her text message and I cried. I was just like, I'm not going to respond to you right now. And then a couple days later, I got sick. And I got so sick. I had a fever. I mean, it was a cold. I'm, not like so sick, but I had a fever. I was congested. I felt awful. And so I went from feeling healthy, but feeling like I couldn't do it to then having this physical reason to be like, I literally cannot do it because I'm sick. And it was just so crazy to see, like, to have that question posed of, why did you manifest this sickness now? Because it reaffirmed that story that I can't do this, that I'm incapable. And seeing that and just being like, oh, hell no, ego. You don't, no. You don't get to tell me I'm incapable. Like, this is not happening. I took the day, I rested, I feel so much better. But it was just, it's a crazy journey to go through and just continuously be as curious as possible after you experience those triggers and come out, on the other side.
Yeah. And I want to share this because I hope that this is helpful for people out there because I don't think this is talked about enough, what it really takes to go to these new levels in business and in life. And it's not all like getting sexy professional photos and blazers, like it's not all like being like a badass boss and looking awesome. Like there's triggers, there's crying, like you're going to confront things that have been dormant and you haven't dealt with before that could go really far back. So if you are going for something, if you're trying to do something new and change your life and go for something that's more than what you've gone through before, and it's a shit show, that's good news. That means you are really on track.
Absolutely. It's actually going super deep. That's where the breakthroughs are. That's what we've seen when we coach our clients. It's not, when we get on those mastermind calls, it's not surface level. Like, what is the strategies you're doing? It's like actually going really deep and seeing what are the deepest vulnerabilities that haven't been talked about and haven't been dealt with, because that's where the shifts are. And just, the important thing is remaining open to the work. Like, I've already told you that I've cried recently about this in the fetal position on my couch. We share that. It's a little embarrassing, but I know you can all relate to it. And I think, again, like Margy said, I mean, we haven't had headshots in over a year. That is like, we're here to tell you, like, the actual work it takes to hit these high goals is this inner work and this transformation, and just being open to face the triggers and then move through them. Because when you do, you then can help other people. You can see the triggers in them and say, oh, you know what? I've been through this. So now I understand how to help you through it. All right. Do you want to say something to wrap it up?
Yeah. What call to action do you want?
I mean, the normal call to action, we have a pre-recorded outro. But this is also the start of the masterclass. So I would just say, something like, we hope this was helpful. We are kicking off our next podcast guesting masterclass today, interviewconnections.com/live masterclass.
All right. Yes. So I hope that this was helpful for you. We want to keep the conversation going. We are kicking off our live masterclass today. You can go to interviewconnections.com/live masterclass to register. It's happening in the Facebook group, and get in that Facebook group, because whether you can make all the sessions live or not, that conversation is really valuable. And we really want to hear from you and hear about your breakthroughs in business that you've had and those breakthroughs to new goals that are yet to come.